I pretended to be a poor helpless mom when I went to meet my daughter-in-law's family, and the moment I walked into their home I could feel the change in the air because they looked at me like I was a burden they never expected, and I stayed quiet and gentle, acting exactly like a woman who had nothing and understood even less, because I wanted to see who they really were behind their polite smiles and forced greetings. And as the minutes passed, their true nature began to show in small ways that were impossible to ignore, like the way they whispered to each other thinking I could not hear, or the way they offered me the oldest chair in the corner, or how they spoke to me with slow words as if I could not understand anything at all, and I kept my voice soft and my posture humble because every second revealed something new about them, and I wanted to give them enough space to expose themselves completely. And when dinner started, they served everyone first and left me for last with the smallest portion, as if I did not matter, and I kept observing silently, letting their behavior write the truth for me. And I watched how my daughter-in-law avoided eye contact, how her parents sighed heavily every time I asked a simple question, how her sister looked at my clothes as if they were dirty even though they were clean and neatly pressed, and I realized that these people judged worth by appearance and status, and I let them continue thinking I was weak, because sometimes silence is the loudest mirror. And when the evening ended, they spoke nicely again, trying to act polite, but their actions had already shown who they were. And the next week when they visited my home, they were shocked to find a warm, bright house and a comfortable life, because they believed I had nothing, and I watched their faces freeze in surprise as they tried to rearrange their attitude within seconds, and in that moment I understood everything I needed to know about them, because respect given only to the rich is not respect. Because excuses are often the shield of those who have learned not just to feel ashamed. And I sat across from them and began to speak calmly, explaining how I had chosen to act poor and naive because I needed to know what kind of family my son had married into, and I told them that wealth, status, or appearance had never mattered to me, and that all I ever wanted was a daughter-in-law who came from a family that valued kindness, humility, and respect. But instead I saw judgment, arrogance, and coldness. When they believed I had nothing to offer, and their faces tightened with embarrassment because the truth was not easy for them to swallow, and I watched the father shift uncomfortably, trying to hide the tremor in his breath, and the mother sitting stiffly like someone trying to hold on to pride even when pride had already slipped from her hands. And I continued speaking slowly without anger because I wanted my words to echo in their minds long after this moment ended, and I told them that real character is revealed not when someone meets a powerful person, but when they meet someone they think has nothing. And I explained how their behavior at dinner had spoken louder than anything they could say now, and I reminded them of every moment they had spoken down to me, every moment they had acted irritated, every moment they had treated me with less respect than they offered strangers. And the mother opened her mouth to defend herself with another excuse, but I raised my hand, gently stopping her, because excuses would only weaken the little dignity they had left, and they fell silent again, the kind of silence that happens when the truth is too heavy to escape. And I could feel the air in the room shift from shame to reflection, and I hoped this moment would stay with them and change something inside them, because my son deserved in-laws who knew how to treat people with respect regardless of wealth. And after a long quiet pause, I stood up and told them to give them a chance to understand their mistake and grow from it. And I told them clearly that I expected our families to treat each other with kindness from now on, not because of status, but because that is the only foundation for a peaceful life. And I watched as the mother finally nodded slowly, her eyes lowered and her pride broken, but in a good way, because sometimes pride must break for humility to enter. And the father spoke softly, saying he understood and that they would try to do better. And even though their words were small, they carried something heavier, something real, not polished but honest. And my daughter-in-law looked relieved, as if hope had returned to her chest after days of fear. And I placed my hand gently on her shoulder, reminding her that she was now part of my family too, and that she did not need to fear honesty, because honesty is the only thing that strengthens relationships. And she smiled through her tears, a fragile smile but genuine and full of gratitude, and the tension in the room slowly softened like a storm finally calming after hours of wind and rain. And I offered them tea, not because of tradition, but because sometimes the smallest gesture can open a new path, a fresh beginning where respect grows naturally without force or pressure. And they accepted, and we sat together not as people pretending to impress each other, but as people slowly learning something important about themselves and about each other. And as the evening passed, the heavy discomfort slowly shifted into understanding, and I could see a subtle change in the way they spoke, the way they looked at me, the way they chose their words with more care, and I realized that even flawed hearts can change when truth is given without hatred, and when lessons are delivered with calm strength instead of anger. And by the time they left, I knew that something in them had shifted, perhaps not completely but enough to open the door for future kindness, and I stood at the doorway watching them walk away, thinking about how strange it is that people often show their true faces not in moments of wealth but in moments of simplicity, and how sometimes we must test people not to expose them but to protect ourselves and the ones we love. And later that night, when my son came home, I told him everything, and he listened quietly, absorbing every detail. And when I finished, he hugged me tightly with the kind of hug that says more than words, and told me he was grateful that I had protected our family with wisdom instead of anger, and that he would talk to his wife gently, helping her grow into someone stronger, someone unafraid to speak for what is right. And I felt warmth in my heart because I knew that this experience would not break our family but strengthen it, and help shape a future built on truth, respect, and courage. And as I went to bed that night, I realized that sometimes pretending to be small reveals who is truly small on the inside, and who has the heart to become better. And in the end, the lesson was clear: the value of a person has never been measured by wealth, status, or appearance, but by the way they treat those who have nothing to give them in return. I woke up the next morning thinking about everything that had happened, and for a moment the silence in my home felt different, like something heavy had finally lifted and something new was beginning to grow. And I walked to the kitchen slowly, thinking about my daughter-in-law, her parents, and the complicated threads that connect people who are meant to become family. And as I poured myself a cup of tea, I kept replaying their faces, the shock, the guilt, the quiet understanding that finally settled into their eyes when they realized the truth. And I wondered if they would truly change, or if they would simply pretend to be better for the sake of appearance. But I reminded myself that real change begins slowly, sometimes with discomfort, sometimes with shame, sometimes with a moment that breaks a person open just enough for honesty to. And as I sipped my tea, I thought about how life has a strange way of teaching people lessons in unexpected ways, and how sometimes the only way to know who someone truly is to strip away every sign of status and watch how they treat someone they believe is beneath them. And I realized that the test I had created was not just for them but for my own understanding too, because even though I had seen their ugliness, I had also seen their potential to be better once the mask of superiority was removed. And later that afternoon, my daughter-in-law came to visit, and she walked in with slow steps, as if she was carrying a fragile truth in her hands. And she sat down quietly beside me, and without looking up, she said she had been thinking about everything since last night. And she told me she felt ashamed not only for how her family behaved but for staying silent when she knew deep inside that it was wrong. And her voice trembled with honesty, and I could feel her heart trying to rebuild itself. And I placed my hand over hers, giving her the comfort she needed but not the escape from responsibility, because growth requires both truth and forgiveness. And she told me she grew up in a home where appearances mattered more than character, where her parents taught her that wealth defined respect, and that poverty meant failure. And she said she never believed those things fully, but she also never learned how to stand up against them. And I listened carefully, understanding the weight she carried. And I could see that she wanted to become different from the environment she came from, and that desire alone was enough for me to give her space to grow. And she promised she would never stay silent again when someone disrespected me or anyone else, because she understood now that silence can hurt as deeply as words. And I nodded gently, feeling a sense of hope, because acknowledging a mistake is the first step to becoming better. And as the day passed, we talked about small things about life, and I could see her relaxing, slowly building trust brick by brick, because trust is never built at once. It grows in layers, like sunlight breaking through early morning fog. And later in the evening, she left with a soft smile, warmer than the day before, and I knew she would carry this lesson with her into every choice she made from now on. And a few days later, her parents invited me for tea, and though I could sense their nervousness through their message, I decided to go, not because I needed their apology, but because I wanted to see if their behavior had truly changed. And when I arrived at their home, I noticed small details that were different, like the way they welcomed me with genuine warmth in their voice, not forced politeness like before. And the mother brought tea herself instead of asking someone else to do it. And the father pulled out the best chair for me without hesitation, and I could feel the energy in the room shift to something more humble, something grounded in real effort and not empty gestures, and they spoke to me with a tone that carried respect, not because of wealth but because they finally understood that every person deserves dignity regardless of their situation. And as I watched them trying to correct their behavior, I felt a strange calm spreading in my chest, because I realized that people are not born cruel, they are shaped by experiences, beliefs, and fears. And sometimes it takes one powerful moment to wake them up and lead them toward the right path. And throughout our conversation, they did not try to justify their past behavior. Instead, they acknowledged it with sincere regret. And that alone told me they were changing, because acceptance of fault is something only the mature can do. And we talked for a long time, not about money or status or differences, but about family and unity, and the importance of raising children who value kindness above wealth. And I could see that even though perfection was far away, they were taking their first steps toward better versions of themselves. And I appreciated that, because real connection is not built on flawless people but on flawed people who try. And as I left their home that evening, I felt a sense of peace settle inside me, because I knew this chapter was slowly turning into something healthier, something steadier, and something far more honest than where we started. And when I reached home, I sat quietly thinking about how life often gives us the opportunity to test others, but sometimes the people we test end up teaching us something in return. And I realized that forgiveness does not make us weak, it makes us wise, and choosing to guide someone toward change instead of punishing them gives them the chance to transform, and that transformation can weave stronger family ties than anything money could buy. In days turned into weeks, and I noticed how my daughter-in-law began visiting more often, helping around the house, asking questions with genuine curiosity, wanting to learn, wanting to grow, wanting to build a home where respect flowed naturally without fear or pressure. And every time I watched her, I saw a girl slowly becoming a woman shaped not by her past but by the lessons that life had finally allowed her to see clearly. And sometimes she would sit beside me and speak about her inner fears, how she never wanted to disappoint me or hurt me again. And I told her that mistakes do not define a person, only their willingness to change does. And she held on to those words like a promise she wanted to keep forever. And my son too began noticing her efforts, and he supported her, guiding her gently without judgment, because he understood that growth is a journey, not a destination. And watching them together, I felt a warmth in my heart, a hope that the new future they were building would be one of strength, honesty, and compassion. And every night as I sat alone reflecting on everything, I remembered the moment when I pretended to be poor, hiding the truth in the hearts of the people connected to my family. And I realized that sometimes life requires us to become small to see who around us is truly big on the inside, and who only appears big from the outside. And the lesson repeated itself in my mind again and again, that the value of a person is revealed not by how they treat the powerful but by how they treat the powerless. And I understood that my test was not just a test for them but a mirror for me, showing me the importance of patience, wisdom, and calm strength. And this understanding filled me with a quiet peace, because I knew the choices I made had protected my son, had helped my daughter-in-law grow, and had guided her parents toward humility and kindness. And in the end, this journey showed me that truth handled with grace can change even the hardest hearts. And as the moon rose high outside my window, I knew one thing clearly, that respect built on honesty lasts longer than respect built on wealth. And this truth would remain the foundation of my family for years to come. I woke up the next day feeling a quiet strength inside me, because everything that had happened had changed not only them but also me. And I realized that sometimes the most painful moments lead to the most powerful lessons. And as I went about my morning chores, I kept thinking about how my daughter-in-law had begun to grow into a woman who understood the value of respect, and not the value of wealth. And I could see that her heart was slowly opening like a flower that had lived too long in the shade and was finally reaching toward the light. And I felt grateful, because not every person chooses to change when confronted with their flaws, but she had, and that alone showed me she had goodness inside her waiting to rise. And around noon she called me, saying she wanted to visit and help with whatever I needed. And when she arrived, she carried a sincerity in her eyes that could only come from others. And as she worked beside me, cleaning, cutting vegetables, and talking softly, I saw pieces of her that had been hidden before, pieces shaped by gentleness, honesty, and a desire to grow. And I encouraged her every chance I got, because growth blooms faster when someone believes in you. And later that evening my son joined us, and the three of us shared a simple meal, but the silence between us felt warm, not heavy like before. And my son looked at his wife with admiration because he could see her efforts clearly, and he held her hand under the table in a way that spoke louder than words, and I felt a quiet joy because this was what family was meant to be, a place where people learn from each other, not judge each other. And as the days passed, I saw more changes in her parents too, not dramatic or perfect but small steady shifts that revealed a growing awareness, and they began calling occasionally, asking how I was doing, inviting me for tea or offering help with something simple, and though their voices still carried shyness, it was a different kind of shyness, not from pride but from humility, learning to breathe, and I accepted their efforts because true transformation does not happen overnight and forgiveness grows best when watered with patience. And one day when I visited their home again, I noticed something that made me pause. The same chair they once offered me, the old worn-out one, was no longer in the corner, and instead they guided me to a comfortable seat at the center as an honored guest rather than an inconvenience, and this small gesture told me more than words ever could, and I realized that they were trying not because they feared being exposed again but because they genuinely understood the weight of their actions and wanted to do better. And as we talked, they listened carefully without the usual tone of superiority, and the mother even shared memories from her childhood moments when she had been judged unfairly, and how she now understood how deeply such judgment wounds the heart. And for the first time I saw not arrogance but vulnerability in her eyes, and I knew then that the change was real. And later when I was leaving, she walked me to the door and gently touched my hand and whispered that she was grateful for the lesson I had taught them, even though the lesson came wrapped in discomfort. And I smiled because life often teaches through discomfort the lessons that comfort never could. And when I reached home that evening, I thought about how strange and beautiful growth can be, how people can surprise us in ways we never expect. And I sat on my couch feeling the soft warmth of forgiveness settle around me like a blanket, and I understood that this entire journey had given me something precious. It had shown me that kindness does not mean weakness, and wisdom does not mean silence, and standing up for respect does not require shouting, only clarity and calm strength. And I started noticing changes in my daughter-in-law too. She began speaking with more confidence, carrying herself with a sense of dignity I had not seen before, and whenever someone tried to belittle another person in front of her, she no longer stayed silent because she knew deep inside that silence protects the wrong side. And one afternoon when we were sitting together, she told me she had confronted her mother gently but firmly about the way she had treated me, and how she would not allow such behavior ever again. And I felt proud, not because she defended me but because she finally defended what was right. And as the sun set that day, I realized that this experience had reshaped our family like a river that slowly carves stone over time, making something smoother, stronger, and clearer. And nights passed, and I found myself reflecting on how one small act, pretending to be poor, pretending to be weak, pretending to have nothing, had opened the doors to truth. And I smiled softly because sometimes pretending reveals more truth than honesty ever could. And one weekend, my son and daughter-in-law invited both families to dinner, hoping to bring everyone together in a new beginning, free from the mistakes of the past. And when everyone arrived, the room felt different, lighter, more open, filled with a gentle respect that had never existed before. And the father of my daughter-in-law approached me first, speaking with sincerity that came from a place of genuine effort. And he said that he now understood the importance of treating every person with dignity because life has a way of reversing roles and showing us that power and wealth are temporary but character is permanent. And I nodded because this was the truth I had wanted them to see from the start. And as we all sat down to eat, I watched everyone interacting, laughing softly, asking questions without judgment. And it felt as if the old heaviness had dissolved, replaced by a fragile but growing trust. And my daughter-in-law moved around serving dishes, making sure everyone was comfortable, her face carrying a glow of newfound strength. And my son kept stealing soft glances at her, his eyes filled with pride because he had always believed she could be better if given the chance. And seeing them like this warmed my heart more than words could ever express. And later, as dinner ended and people began to leave, the mother of my daughter-in-law hugged me tightly, something she had never done before. And for a moment I felt the sincerity in her embrace, the quiet promise that she would never forget the lesson she had learned. And I hugged her back. Because forgiveness is not about erasing the past but choosing not to let the past dictate the future. And as the night grew quiet and I sat alone thinking about everything, I realized that life had taught me something too. It taught me that sometimes people need to be shown their reflection not through anger but through patience and courage and wisdom. And as I closed my eyes, I felt a deep peace knowing that my family was stronger, kinder, and more united than ever. And all of it began with a simple test that revealed the true hearts of everyone involved, and I promised myself that I would continue guiding my family with the same calm strength, because the greatest power we hold is the power to change hearts not through force, but through truth carried gently in our hands. In the following weeks, life began to settle into a rhythm that felt almost new, as if the air around us had shifted into something softer, wiser, and more open, and I found myself waking each morning with a sense of calm that I had not felt in years. And as I moved around my home doing little tasks, I kept thinking about how one simple choice, pretending to be poor, pretending to be helpless, pretending to be someone they believed was unimportant, had unraveled the truth hidden beneath their polished words and artificial smiles. And every time I remembered their shocked faces when they discovered who I truly was, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and satisfaction, because while their initial behavior had exposed their flaws, their later actions had revealed their potential for growth. And one afternoon, while I was watering the small garden outside, my daughter-in-law arrived unexpectedly, and I saw something different in her eyes, a gentle determination growing brighter each day. And she told me she had spoken openly with her father and mother about respect, honesty, and humility, and she said they had listened quietly, taking her words to heart, and she felt lighter afterward, because for the first time she felt she had found her own voice, not the voice her parents taught her to use, not the voice shaped by fear or pressure, but her own. And I looked at her with pride, because she was finally stepping into the woman she was meant to become. And we walked around the garden together as she told me how she wanted to build a home that was free of judgment, filled with warmth, a home where her children would grow learning to value people by their hearts, not by their wealth. The words of someone who had truly changed. And later that evening my son joined us, and we all sat in the living room sharing simple stories, laughing softly, and I noticed how natural everything felt, how there was no longer the tension that once shadowed our conversations, and my son held his wife's hand with a tenderness that showed his admiration. And I felt grateful, because love always grows stronger in the soil of truth. And as time moved forward, her parents continued to reach out, sometimes with small gestures, sometimes with acts of kindness that felt more sincere than anything they had done before, and I could sense the humility rooted inside their efforts. And though I did not expect perfection, I valued the intention behind every step they took. And one day they invited me to a small family gathering, and when I arrived I noticed they introduced me to their relatives with genuine respect, speaking about me with warmth rather than hesitation, and I realized how deeply the lesson had settled in their hearts. And as I sat there surrounded by unfamiliar faces, I felt no awkwardness, because the energy in the room had shifted completely. Honesty had replaced judgment, kindness had replaced arrogance, and mutual respect had taken the place of quiet disdain. And when the evening ended, the mother of my daughter-in-law walked me outside and told me that my actions had changed the way she viewed life and people, and she said she had spent many nights thinking about her own past, remembering the way she had been treated when she was young and poor, and how she had allowed wealth and status to build walls inside her. And she said she finally understood that those walls had not protected her, they had imprisoned her and kept her from seeing the goodness in others. And I listened quietly, knowing that recognition of one's own flaws is the door through which wisdom enters. And as I returned home, I felt a deep sense of peace settling into my heart, and I realized that sometimes God uses unexpected situations to reveal the truth in people and to guide families into better futures. And over the next several months my daughter-in-law grew into someone strong, graceful, and compassionate, and she began treating everyone around her with kindness, from waiters to neighbors to strangers, because she now understood how painful it is to be judged unfairly, and how powerful it is to be seen with respect. And she often told me that the lesson she learned from me was something she would pass on to her children, teaching them that humility is worth more than gold and character is worth more than pride. And every time she said this my heart softened, because I knew she had not only learned the lesson, she had embraced it fully, and my relationship with her deepened into something beautiful, built on honesty, patience, and trust. And one evening while we were having dinner together, she looked at me with a quiet emotion in her eyes and told me that she considered me not just her mother-in-law but the second mother she had always needed because I had guided her without shaming her, corrected her without humiliating her, and loved her without conditions, and her words touched something deep inside me. And I held her hand gently, feeling a sense of completion, because all I had ever wanted was for the woman married to my son to carry a good heart, and now she did. And weeks later both families gathered again for another dinner, and this time the atmosphere was filled with genuine warmth and laughter, and even the father of my daughter-in-law, who once carried pride like a shield, spoke with gentle sincerity, and at one point, he stood up and thanked me in front of everyone, saying I had shown him that a person's true worth is never measured by their clothes or their home or their wealth but by their heart and actions. And as he spoke I noticed his voice carried something new, something soft, something humbled, and everyone listened silently in his words, and I realized that this family had not just changed temporarily, they had transformed, and this transformation would stay with them for years. And as the night came to an end I looked around at all of them, talking, smiling, caring for each other, and I felt my eyes grow warm because I knew I was witnessing the birth of a family rooted not in pretense but in sincerity. And as I walked home later that night under the calm sky, I thought about how everything had begun with one small test and one simple disguise, pretending to be weak, pretending to be poor, pretending to be someone they believed they could overlook, and that test revealed everything. It showed me who needed guidance, it showed them who they truly were, and it showed my daughter-in-law who she could become. And as I reached my home I whispered a quiet thank you to life for giving me the strength to stay calm, for giving others the chance to change, and for allowing love, respect, and wisdom to grow from moments of discomfort. And I knew in my heart that this story would live in our family for generations, teaching every child born into it that respect is not earned through wealth but through kindness, and that the strongest people are often the ones who remain gentle even when given every reason not to. The deeper meaning behind this story is simple but powerful. True character is never revealed when people think they are being watched or judged. It appears in the quiet moments when they believe no one important is paying attention. By pretending to be a poor and helpless mother, you created a situation where every mask had to fall off. People show respect to wealth, fame, and status very easily, but their real nature comes out when they believe they are dealing with someone who has nothing to offer them in return. This test showed who had genuine kindness in their heart, and who only knew how to honor those they feared. They are built on empathy, decency, and the ability to treat every human being with basic dignity. The daughter-in-law's family failed because their kindness was conditional. It depended on what they believed they could gain. The painful part is that many people in the world behave exactly like this. They judge too quickly, they look down on those who appear weaker, and they lose their humanity chasing status. But the message is not only about exposing the wrong ones. It is about reminding everyone who watches that your behavior toward the powerless says more about you than how you treat the powerful. Respect should never depend on who you think someone is. It should come naturally, simply because they are a person. This story teaches that humility is a strength and kindness is a mirror that reflects the truth of your soul. And in the end, the people who pass such tests